Yeah, so I would describe my childhood as like a fairly typical Singaporean childhood. Like, if you're not especially well-to-do in terms of money,
Yeah.
um, I think I would have a pretty normal childhood by those standards. I was
Okay.
pretty happy. The only one really stressful thing in it was like examinations because Singapore is like really big on examinations, or at least it was insanely big on examinations.
Yeah.
At the time at which I was still in my doing primary school, secondary school, so it was very
Yeah.
happy childhood. Zero interest in debate. Like debate was not something on my radar at all. The thing I
Oh.
was really obsessed with was probably two things actually. One was basketball. Basketball was by far and away the biggest like motivating factor for me getting up in the
Yeah.
morning. Like, I would skip lessons in school to play basketball. I got kicked out of the robotics club because I skipped all of their sessions to go and play basketball. My parents had to forcibly remove me from basketball as a
Wow.
curricular activity in my last year in primary school, so I didn't flunk my national examinations. So that was the main thing. The other thing I really enjoyed doing was reading. I always loved
Okay.
reading from a very, very young age. I suspect that's because of the weird circumstances under which I was born, actually. So, okay, this is like
Okay.
going really far back, but my mom and dad met on a missionary ship
Wow.
called the Doulos. So basically, this ship just sails around the
Okay.
world. It distributes
Yeah.
educational literature and Christian literature, right?
Okay.
So it stopped at Kerala, which is this state in the far south of India. And I think my dad
Yeah.
on and worked there as I think, I'm not sure exactly what he was working as, possibly an engine room engineer or something like that.
Okay.
Uh, and then when it stopped at Singapore, my mum got on. And I think that's how
Okay.
they met.
Okay.
So I think they eventually got married in Singapore. Then after I was born, they took me back on board the ship for I think 1 to 2 years.
Oh.
So for
Okay.
my the youngest years of my life, I was stuck on board a
Yeah.
floating library. It literally was just a floating library,
Yeah.
right?
That's
So
true.
if you look it up, it's actually a very interesting historical ship. It was at the point in time the oldest operating ocean liner in the world.
Wow.
Yeah, it just happened to be owned by a Christian organization. So I
Yeah.
suspect that's where the interest in reading came from. How I got well, the school I went to in primary school, so that's up till the age of 12. The school I went to was like a
Yeah.
very ordinary school. It's what in Singapore you would call a neighborhood school, which is just a
Okay.
polite way of saying not a school exactly distinguished by a track record of academic excellence. It might be distinguished for other
Yeah.
reasons, but not
Yeah.
academic.
Not particularly academic
Yeah,
excellence.
yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
in Singapore, they stream students from a very young age, very aggressively,
Okay.
and the Ministry of Education just came to do the examination for all the kids in the
Yeah.
school to see which kids in my primary school were gifted, right?
Oh.
Like
Okay.
zero of us passed the test. So none of us were in the gifted stream. It was that kind of a school, yeah. Um, and
Yeah.
then every year there's a big national examination where you leave your primary school, and for
Yeah.
some genuinely freakish reason, I do not know how this happened. No one around me knows how this happened.
Yeah.
Um, I ended up doing extremely well for that. I ended up becoming the top Indian scorer in Singapore. Like,
Wow.
how did it happen? No one knows. It's a total miracle slash mystery. I had never even been close to being the number one in my academic batch in the primary
Yeah.
school. And now I was the
Yeah.
top Indian student in Singapore. Like, what is this nonsense? Like, someone made a mistake somewhere. So that happened, and then I went to all the standard elite educational institutions after that, and things kind of worked
Yeah.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
None of my debating knowledge comes from books either. I've never read anything debating related in my life. I absolutely detest reading nonfiction. Who wants a stupid book filled with facts and some half-ass punditry about some incredibly complex issue this person probably doesn't understand? Like, I don't know. I read fiction. Fiction is it's great. The problem with non
Uh,
I was telling Erasmus, so I'm surrounded by nonfiction all the time. I look out of my window and I'm
yeah.
like, that's nonfiction. I look at the news and just nonfiction just splashes itself across my face. I
Yeah.
need fiction to
Yeah.
keep me alive.
But did you have any debate characteristics that were deeply rooted in maybe your background, your childhood,
Hmm.
um, that eventually you had to change, or were you able to stick with them and then those influenced your ideas within the debate sports, which still made you a good debater?
Well, I mean, There's probably only one thing, which is that I've always quite enjoyed looking at ideas. I've always found ideas very interesting to play around with.
Yeah.
I got into debate just because one of my teachers said, "You're very noisy in class. You should probably join the debate club." And then I did. And I
Oh.
wasn't any good at it actually until my second year on the national team. So it happened
Yeah.
really quite suddenly, actually, in the elimination rounds of the 2011 World Schools Debating Championship. Again,
Yeah.
one of these strange things. I'm not sure why exactly it happened or how. So the one thing which has kind of remained constant is I've always really liked ideas, and I think that's translated into the way I debate. I am much more. I don't really like technical debating.
Okay.
I'm not a huge fan of winning based on the info slide or saying, well, technically the info slide says this and not that. So I'm like, well, that's pointless, right? So I
Yeah.
really like looking at big ideas play out in debates. I guess the first thing I should say is that having big ideas does not preclude having detailed mechanization and caveats and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that should not be where you start, right? I always tell the people who I coach or who ask me for advice, when you see emotion, the first thing you should do is stop thinking like a debater and ask yourself, if an ordinary person on the street saw this, what would their obvious big thought be on one side or the other? And 99% of the
Yeah.
time, that is the correct big idea. I think that's where you
Okay.
have to start. And then the rigor comes on top of that, right? But actually, I find this is something which, well, I think modern debating is not that different from debating uh, when I was doing it competitively. I think
Yeah.
one thing that's gotten a bit lost is the idea of narrative. That,
Yeah.
sure, mechanisms and arguments are great, but actually, what wins a debate very often is just the underlying narrative of what the debate's about or what's at stake.
Yeah.
And that actually is not something you establish by saying, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give you 4 points of framing and 3 points of context. It
Yeah.
In the debate about whether we should have interlanguages instead of colonial languages or post-independent states, we said that the mere decision to choose a colonial language is principally wrong because it's a continuation of colonial oppression, quite regardless of consequence, right? So, I
Yeah.
think we can still run many of these arguments. They still work well, and teams engage with it, and we then had to defend those arguments.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think big ideas have gone. I tell you what I think might account
Yeah.
for this. I think it's that big ideas require you to commit fully. You can't
Yeah.
half a big idea. You've got to full
Yeah.
asset,
Yeah.
right? And I think when you're in a very competitive frame of mind, when you're in a very competitive phase of your debating career, you might
Yeah.
not want to do that because you might default
Yeah.
to something more risk averse.
Yes.
One thing
Erasmus.
I've always found, both when I was debating and now, is that I don't
Yeah.
really like hanging around. I really enjoy talking to people after the debate. I think that's really fun.
Okay.
I don't really enjoy going back into the room after we've all had this nice social gathering and then having to sit back in our separate seats and then be quiet. And then the judge is like, well, here are your rankings and here are the reason for the rankings. I find that I've
Yeah.
always found psychologically unpleasant. You know, they should find a way to just text us the results with some basic reasons while we're off having fun somewhere, hanging out at a cafe. Can you imagine how nice debating would be if everyone in the debate just like, yeah, let's walk across the street, get a latte, and then we get a text
Yeah.
saying, oh, you won, oh, congrats, right? And we don't need to listen to the judges. I mean, we can hunt them down if we want to, but we don't need to, right? Yeah, it's a good question. I can always tell people this. I think debating today and debating in my day are actually really similar. I don't think very much has changed. I think there was a big change going from the kind of Sam Block, Will Jones, Sheng Wu, Steve Hine, Chris Crook era to what I call the modern era, which is just after that. I think there was a change then, but from when I was debating till now, I think it's actually mostly the same. Maybe I'll tell you the one thing I really miss
Yeah.
is the personal speech.
Mm.
There's some speeches I've seen people give where it's really not about the debate anymore, but it's about something they really deeply personally care about.
Yeah.
And you can tell that the speeches are so compelling because they come from a really genuine place. It's almost like they're not making arguments anymore, right? It's gone to a different, much more interesting place. A couple of examples of this, right? So I think a very famous one people will recognize is in the finals of, I don't know, that WDC final about abortion, right? Where Will
Yeah.
Jones opens his I think DLO speech by saying, um, I've never been so sure in my entire life that what I'm about to say is correct, right? Or in the quarterfinal of the world championship when Shengwu in that debate about cosmetic surgery to change your racial appearance
Yeah.
talks about how he felt very trapped in his Chinese identity because people kept making him having to learn Chinese.
Yeah.
Uh, or actually, maybe even just I'm not sure if this is anything personal, but it sounded very personal to me. Like Steph Bell's speech in the semifinal. Um,
Yeah.
I think it was about whether or not all sexual material should be confined to XXX shops or something like that. I can't quite remember. Or XXX
Hmm.
domains, yeah. Um, I kind of miss that. I miss speeches where you kind of lean back and you're just looking at a person. You're not even thinking about, oh, how do I extend on this? How do I rebut this? You're going, I'm genuinely learning a lot about the world and you as a person. I will tell you one other thing which annoys me about modern debating. Maybe this is the one thing which has changed for sure, which really actually pisses me off. To the extent
Yeah.
I can get pissed off, I'm not really that fast because it is debating after all, right?
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of weird things people do now. You know how everyone's like, oh, debating has become a lot nicer, a lot more inclusive, right? Like, we
Yeah.
care about pronoun introductions, we have blah 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 blah, and that's all great. But people now are doing things which are just, to me at least, really rude and disrespectful. But I don't think they think of these as rude and disrespectful. For example, people sit down when they're giving their speeches. Like, not because of any disability or any accommodation they need, they just sit down. And I'm like, dude, do you think you're so cool compared to everyone in the room that when everyone bothers to stand up and address the audience and the other debaters, you're just like, nah, I'm beyond all this stuff. I'll just sit down here because I can't be bothered to move. Like, what? Actually, the other one is POIs. People sit down and ask POIs like this. Like, what? Don't do that. You look terrible. I've never seen anyone sit down to give a speech which was rhetorically effective or which had any presence or which had any
Okay.
style. How do you look
Okay.
stylistic when you're sitting down? How do you look passionate? No, right? When you're excited about what you're saying, when you believe in what you're saying, you stand
Yeah.
up. That's just a more
Yeah.
natural thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a weird pet peeve. I don't know why people do that. I guess also other weird things are like, speakers just ignoring POIs. Like if someone stands up to ask you a POI, I always thought like it's respectful that you don't just say anything, but at least wave them down. Now people will be like,
Yeah.
no, you don't exist. I don't even see you at all. Uh, or what other strange things do people do? There must be some other things. Oh, when people give personal POI policies before the speech, like I will
Yeah.
take POIs in sign language only in these two 30-second windows, and I'm like, why? Why do you want to make yourself look? It just makes you look scared before the debate even
Yeah.
speech has begun. You've basically told the whole room, I'm not very good at debating. Okay, when people ask me
Yeah.
questions, I get really scared. So, but since the rule said you must, please like sign language at me or something. Like, just deal with it. And then some people get really annoyed when people don't follow their cute little personal POI policy. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
screw you. The rules allow me to interrupt your speech by standing up and yelling information. I'm going to do that. So if you want to take 90 seconds or 2 minutes out of your speech to thank your coaches in the audience and how what an honor it's been to be invited and how wonderful the food was during lunch, great. Just do that in your speech because those 7 minutes are entirely your playground.
Yeah.
Uh, and no, I tell you why I don't like monologues which are like separate from the speech. They just really
Yeah.
sap the energy out of a debate. A debate's going on, someone's
True.
giving a
True.
speech,
True.
right?
True.
You want momentum to build, someone to come and immediately
Yeah.
rebut. And when someone comes on and is like, oh, says all that lovey-dovey stuff, firstly, it's not interesting to me. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just cold-hearted, but, you know, if you really love and care for someone and really want to appreciate them, I'm not sure this is the best way to do it. Tell them, go bring them out for a dinner and have a great conversation with them. And that's so much more meaningful than like, hey, shout out, coach. Woo, you the best. Like, sure, whatever. Also, I think it genuinely affects the fairness of a debate, right? Like, you are genuinely
Yeah.
inserting 10 minutes of stuff. Like, everyone does this. It just
Yeah.
drags out the debate. And I'm also not sure there isn't an element of trying to just pander to the audience in that. Like, I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
games are being played when people do this. I'm 100% sure. Uh, which I'm totally okay with. You should absolutely play games to win debates. But
Yeah.
7 minutes to play those games, so use up those 7 minutes, right? Um,
Yeah.
like, can you imagine if Shengwu in his quarterfinal was like, before I start my speech, let me first tell you a story of how I was forced to learn Chinese as a child. I'm like, shut up, just debate, okay? Oh God, yeah. No, I always found it. Maybe it's okay, this might just be
Yeah.
it. Like, I can totally see the other side. Oh, it's a very nice, sweet thing. It's
Yeah.
generally makes everyone feel good. It saps a bit of the tension and the negative energy which can buzz around the debate. I totally get that. Maybe this at the
Yeah.
end of the day is a kind of cultural thing. I lean more on the British, like, please don't show your emotions in a public format. That's very unseemly. Whereas
Yeah.
the Americans are all like heart on sleeve. Oh my God, I love you, you love me. We're a happy family. POIs. So I think it
Yeah.
is totally okay to respond to a POI which does not seem relevant to debate by saying, look, you're a terribly clever person. I'm sure you'll enlighten all of us with your speech, and I look forward to it. I think it's fine, right? I mean, and so Erasmus, I would have probably done what you did. I'm like, you know what? I look forward to your speech, and if that's your extension, all I'm going to say is good luck selling that. But something clearly relevant to the debate.
Yeah.
And you do that kind of dismissive response, I think that probably counts against you, right? Because a good speaker will
Yeah.
come out later and say, that previous speaker probably thought they were being clever by not committing. No, that's a fatal error. Here's why
Yeah.
they didn't actually dare to answer that POI, right? And then they will explain it,
Yeah.
and then you look a bit of a
Yeah.
fool, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say in general, I have noticed people are not quite willing to engage POIs fully. Like if someone asks you a
Yeah.
POI, nowadays the default mode seems to be like you treat POIs as an ego contest. Like I will
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
something kind of cocky and dismissive and then move on like a
Yeah.
one-liner.
Yeah.
And I always thought, well, is your ego so small and fragile that you can't take another 30 seconds to engage the actual idea behind that POI or where it was going, right? Um,
Yeah.
there's a good faith discussion to be had here. Have that discussion and move on.
Yeah. You put a python around your neck. I saw a picture and I was wondering what
Oh yeah, yeah,
what
yeah.
what was
I was
that?
in Bali
Which
after in 2017 after the World Schools Debating Championship.
yeah.
So I hung out with Kwan Hian and Chin Wei.
Okay.
You might recognize them. I think they did a fair amount of debating and won a bunch of things. Um, and yeah, there was we went to one of the temples in Bali, and there was a person there just with a python who was like, would you like to take a picture of a python? And I love snakes. I think snakes are great. They get such a terrible rap just because of Adam and Eve, right? And yeah, I don't know. I've always found them very cute and quite adorable.
Because
I think it's much more important to have a strong set of core beliefs. Um,
okay.
I think both are important, but maybe the way I want to put it is this: I think it's important that you have a contingent belief in what you believe, right? Like you acknowledge that your views might be wrong, and there are certain things about the world which you should at least acknowledge are capable of showing you that your views are wrong, right? So they're not just
Yeah.
unfalsifiable. But even while you're making your beliefs contingent in that sense, the only way you can, I think, be a real human being with any beliefs at all is to act on the beliefs you happen to have, even if you're not
Yeah.
100% certain of what they are. Um, I think the great thing about, I mean, it's interesting. I think most debaters actually have a relatively strong core set of beliefs. Um, but I think, in effect, debating pushes people towards the center, which is not a
Yeah.
bad thing. Being a centrist does not mean you don't have a strong set of beliefs. Like you can be a really radical, hardcore centrist, right, and have a deep commitment to centrist beliefs. Like centrists are not
Mhm.
just people who are like, well, I'm not sure what I believe. Do I believe A or B? No, a centrist could be person who says, well, I believe in like half of A and half of B, but I'm very sure that this half of A and this half of B is correct, right?
Yeah.
I think that's very,
Yeah.
very good. I think that the fact that debating gives you an appreciation for the other side and lets you see the gaps in your own beliefs is very, very important because I think the problem in the world today um, is that people have run off to both extremes. Like you have some people who are so fanatical in their beliefs that they're essentially
Yeah.
unfalsifiable. There's nothing which could possibly
Yeah.
change their views, right? Like a great
Yeah.
example, all the Trump voters who bought shares in his pointless, stupid company, Truth Social. And even though it's lost like half of its value, they're still like, no, I will yeet more money into it because Donald Trump knows the way. Um, that's what happens when your conviction
Yeah.
tips over into fanaticism. On the other hand, you have, and I think this is more prevalent among people who are young and on the left. a very
Yeah.
deep-seated cynicism about the whole world. Right? Like, oh, everything is
Yeah.
just power structures and manipulation. There's nothing we can do. No one in politics is good. The whole system is
Yeah.
entirely broken, and that's also
Yeah.
incredibly paralyzing. Because I don't think the system is broken at all. I think the system works okay with some problems. Right? The good thing about debating is that it avoids both of those.
Yeah.
So my views have become a lot more nuanced as a result of debating over time. In fact, I will say I identify as a sort of pragmatic liberal Marxist. I'm
Yeah.
much more left than I am liberal, I would say. But many
Yeah.
of my best friends are right or center right. But when I
Yeah.
talk to them about geopolitical issues, when we discuss issues, we seem to have the same views. It's
Yeah.
really strange. And that gives me a lot of hope, actually, that, reasonable people who um, have a genuine interest in the world, who are willing to have their
Yeah.
beliefs challenged and to update them, can actually come to a fairly shared set of beliefs. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you know, it's very annoying, I must say, as a debater with a but who identifies as being on the left, that so many of the people who share my beliefs believe in them for stupid reasons. You know, like, like, oh God, why must I associate with all of these morons on the left? Because they are just some of these people are wild and genuinely just bad people. But I guess I'm on the same part of the political spectrum as them. In fairness, I think the right has this problem probably to a greater extent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think that's where having a core set of beliefs becomes important. I know some debaters, very few, whose beliefs are not actually a result of what they care about, their deep moral convictions, but just a result of who they're most annoyed at in this particular phase of their
Yeah.
lives. Like you've said, which is that you should not be allowed to openly contradict your opening, and certainly not to rebut them.
Yeah.
Um, but it shouldn't be the case that if you disagree with the premise, you
Yeah.
automatically get a fourth. Here is why I think that the anti-knifing rule is actually very fun and very useful. Firstly, I just think in a pure does it make the game more interesting sense, I think it makes the game a lot more interesting
Yeah.
because it forces you to do a weird, sneaky thing where you disagree, but you can't be seen to disagree. And I think there's an
Yeah.
art to that. There is a way to do that. This is a very specific skill set you can use to do that. To
Yeah.
say, look, you can say something like, "Well, Judge, I entirely agree with the opening. That obviously is the major context. I will just say that even outside of these contexts, have very large interests at play. Here are what some of these interests are and why I should care about those as well." If you say something like
Yeah.
that, you're actually just knifing, but in a nice way, which judges will appreciate. And I think judges are
Yeah.
nice people too. If your opening has run a crap case, they will obviously give you more space to do that stuff, right? Because you are rescuing
Yeah.
the debate for everyone, right?
Yeah.
The other thing, the second thing I would say, why I do think the anti-knifing rule is good, is that in real life, this is way more important than rebutting someone. Knowing
Yeah.
how to undermine someone while still nominally agreeing with them is far more
Yeah.
important than being able to directly tell someone why they are wrong
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
workplace, in a boardroom,
Yeah.
even
That's really
in
true.
diplomacy,
Really,
right?
really, really
The
true.
number of
Yeah.
times I've been able to say to someone, "Oh, well, no, I agree with you. You're entirely correct. All I want to add is that we need to take this very important thing into consideration because without this thing, your plan wouldn't quite work. Don't you agree?" And they'll go, "Oh, yes, 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 yes."
Yeah.
Right? That's a very
Yeah.
important skill. And I think that is one of the unusual beauties, I think, of the British parliamentary format.
Yeah.
How to undermine without contradiction. And that's
Yeah.
when, as I mentioned earlier, the narrative becomes important. Can without needing to rebut my opening, I can just paint a narrative which is entirely outside what they've talked about,
Yeah.
right? And I can do it without knifing. I think in a weird way, it all kind of cancels out. So that the average debater is probably no better or worse an average world leader than like a person on the street. Because I think debating
Yeah.
gives you stuff on both sides, right? So the good thing about debaters for sure is that they at least can appreciate there's another side, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, if someone rises to a place of prominence in a left wing party, but their entire life they've only been in the labor movement,
Yeah.
right? They might never actually have seriously engaged with the ideas of the other side. It's quite possible for that to have happened. So debaters get the other side. On the other hand, are debaters mendacious, distortionary, cherry picking morons a lot of the time? Oh, absolutely, because the format of the game demands that, right? And
Yeah.
also, debaters are very good at justifying backwards, right? So The flip
Yeah.
side of learning how to appreciate the other side is that you become good at justifying anything. You pick your beliefs
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
and then the justifications later. And that's
Yeah.
very dangerous.